Emma Carter's ordinary night turns into a nightmare when she receives a desperate message from herself, claiming to be trapped in a subway. The city is no longer what it seems, and neither is she. Emma Carter was never one for superstitions. A corporate worker in her early 30s, her life revolved around deadlines, meetings, and the steady hum of New York City. She thrived on routine and logic, but one night, something happened that unraveled everything she thought she knew about herself. A voicemail. It was from herself. The voice was unmistakable, her own, trembling with fear, pleading for help. "I'm trapped," she cried, her voice barely audible. "On the subway. Please, Emma, help me." But there was something wrong. Emma didn't remember recording it. She hadn't been on the subway, had she? She had been at the office that night, preparing for a big presentation. Yet, as the haunting message replayed in her mind, doubts started to creep in. The voicemail wasn't just a cry for help. It was a warning from someone somewhere who knew far too much about Emma's life. And as the minutes ticked by, Emma realized something terrifying. The woman in the voicemail wasn't just lost or desperate. She was her. But that meant if she didn't act quickly, Emma herself could end up trapped, just like the voice on the call. Emma Carter was a woman who liked to stay in control. Her life in New York City had always been a steady march of predictable days. At 32, she had carved a comfortable place for herself in the corporate world. Her office, nestled in a towering high-rise, provided her with the security she craved, the kind that came with a structured schedule and clear goals. The streets outside, usually bustling and vibrant, were a stark contrast to the sterile predictability of her life. But now, after hearing the unsettling voicemail from her future self, everything began to slip out of focus. The message, chilling and cryptic, reverberated through her mind. Emma had no memory of recording it, but it was unmistakably her voice, filled with panic and desperation. She needed to find answers, and she needed to do it fast. The problem was that the more she tried to understand what was happening, the more she felt like the ground beneath her was giving way. The first thing Emma did was attempt to retrace her steps. She remembered working late at the office the night before, preparing for an important meeting that was set to happen the next day. After that, everything became hazy. Her thoughts were clouded, and the more she tried to remember, the further away the answers seemed to drift. She couldn't even recall how she had gotten home. Had she been on the subway? The thought filled her with dread, yet the city's subway system was vast, twisting beneath the streets like a labyrinth, an endless maze she rarely ventured into. Emma's mind raced, trying to figure out if there was any connection between the strange voicemail and her past actions. The more she thought about it, the more she realized something terrible. She was on the verge of losing herself. If that woman in the voicemail was really her, then what was about to happen to her? What was the future trying to warn her about? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Emma reached out to her best friend, Daniel Hayes, an IT specialist with a penchant for digging into things most people left alone. Danny was quick to agree to help. He had always been the rational one in their friendship, but there was a tension in his voice that night when they spoke. He too felt like something was off, like they were dealing with something far beyond technology. His skills would help, he knew that, but there was something about Emma's urgency that sent a chill down his spine. They quickly examined the voicemail together. Danny was able to pull up strange data logs from Emma's phone, data that didn't add up. The file had been created at a time when Emma was supposed to be at her office, but the timestamp indicated the call had come from hours later, from a moment when she could not have been near the phone. The confusion deepened when Danny managed to hack into the building's security feed. There, on the flickering screens, Emma saw something impossible. A version of herself stood motionless in the lobby, staring directly at the security camera. The same image repeated, over and over again, even as she could swear she had never been there. How was this possible? Had someone been using her identity? Or was it truly her, trapped somewhere inside the building? Emma felt a creeping sense of dread wash over her. If she was trapped, if she was the one stuck in the past, then what happened to the version of herself who was sending the message? Why was she warning herself? What was the purpose of this strange loop? Her thoughts became more jumbled as she tried to make sense of it all. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She needed to return to the office, to the building that was locked and seemingly abandoned. But the streets outside the office were eerily quiet, a far cry from the usual hum of city life. A thick fog had begun to settle over New York, and the usual crowds had disappeared, leaving only faint shadows in the alleyways and the distant flicker of streetlights. As Emma made her way toward the office building, she met a stranger. His presence was unsettling, as though he knew more than he was letting on. Nathaniel Cross, a man with a calm demeanor and an unnerving knowledge of her situation, appeared out of nowhere. He warned her against going back. He spoke cryptically about how he had seen this happen before. But what was he truly trying to say? Was he a friend, or a dangerous man who was leading her into a trap? Emma was forced to make a choice. Should she trust this mysterious stranger, or should she continue on her path toward the building? The stakes grew higher as she realized that time was slipping away. Whatever happened in that office might be the only chance she had to understand the truth. But would she make it there in time, or would she disappear like so many others, lost to a mystery that no one could explain? Emma stood frozen, her heart racing, as the ominous feeling in the pit of her stomach intensified. The strange fog seemed to creep into her lungs with every breath she took, as though the city itself was exhaling something sinister. The silence in the streets felt suffocating, an oppressive force that made the usually bustling city seem alien and distorted. The shadows in the alleyways twisted unnaturally, giving the impression that someone, was watching her every move. New York, the city she knew so well, now felt like a completely different world, one that was shifting and turning against her. As Emma approached the office building, she was unable to shake the unnerving sensation that the very ground beneath her was changing, as if the city itself had turned into a living maze. The familiar landmarks were no longer in their usual places. The streets were darker, narrower, and the skyline loomed over her like an oppressive giant, its windows reflecting an unnatural stillness. The building she had worked in for years now seemed to loom like a giant monolith, its lights flickering intermittently, its entrances locked and unwelcoming. She had to get inside. There was no other choice. The voice from the voicemail, the desperate cries for help, had pushed her forward, no matter how badly her instincts screamed for her to turn around. She needed answers, needed to understand what was happening, and how the woman in the voicemail could be her. What if she was already too late? What if her fate was sealed? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the building's front door, pulling at the heavy handle. It was locked. The streetlights above her flickered once more, casting long, menacing shadows along the ground. She tried again, yanking the door with increasing urgency, but it didn't budge. The usual hum of the city was absent now, replaced by an eerie silence that deepened with every second. The building, the place she once called home, felt more like a tomb than an office. It was then that Emma noticed the movement. The faint flicker on the building's security cameras, visible through the large glass windows of the lobby. She saw herself, or rather, a version of herself, standing still in the lobby, staring directly at the camera. Her heart dropped. It wasn't just the strange image she had seen earlier. It was her, but it wasn't. Emma stepped back, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Her eyes darted around the street, searching for any sign of life. There was nothing. No movement, no other people. Just the same eerie quiet that had settled over the city. She needed to find a way inside. As she paced back and forth, anxiety gnawing at her, her phone buzzed once more. It was an email. The subject line, "Your request has been processed." Her stomach churned. She hadn't made any requests. She opened the email. It was a confirmation for a subway ticket, dated for the very moment she had received the voicemail. But she had never booked a ticket. It was as if the future was already reaching out to her, warning her. and yet pushing her towards something she couldn't understand. There was no time left to waste. Emma knew she had to act. Her instinct told her the office was the key to understanding it all. The voicemail, the strange email, the unsettling feeling that everything was slipping through her fingers. She had to get inside and find out what had happened. But how? She turned to walk around the building, her mind racing. As she reached the back entrance, the hairs on her neck stood up. There was a figure standing in the shadows, watching her. She froze. The figure stepped forward into the dim light. It was the same man, the mysterious Nathaniel Cross, who had appeared out of nowhere earlier. He stood there, his calm demeanor unshaken by the tension in the air. The same unnerving aura radiated from him, as though he knew something Emma didn't. He didn't say a word, but his presence was heavy, like a warning she couldn't ignore. She felt as if someone, was pushing her toward him, forcing her to confront whatever truth lay ahead. And yet, the moment she locked eyes with him, something shifted. The world around her seemed to warp, the city streets distorting in a way she couldn't quite comprehend. The familiar layout of the building now looked foreign, as if she had been transported to a place beyond her understanding. The clock was ticking. The longer she stood there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, the more she felt herself being pulled into a dark, endless spiral. There was no turning back now. The mysterious figure, the strange visions, the warnings from the future, all of it pointed toward one undeniable fact. Emma was running out of time. The version of herself trapped in the voicemail was not just a victim, she was a warning. And if Emma didn't uncover the truth soon, she might very well become the next victim. The world around Emma seemed to blur as she moved through the dimly lit streets, her mind swirling with the growing terror that threatened to consume her. The fog had thickened, curling like tendrils through the air, casting everything in an unnatural, suffocating haze. The familiar noises of New York were now distant echoes, as if the city itself had been swallowed by something dark and malevolent. There was no escaping the eerie atmosphere that pressed in from every direction. Emma knew that she had to keep moving. The building, her office, whatever lay inside, held the key to understanding the horrors unfolding around her. But the closer she got to it, the more distorted reality became. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, warping around her as if they were alive. Every step she took echoed in the silence, a sound that felt far too loud, too sharp. It was as though the very ground beneath her feet was beginning to shift, becoming unrecognizable. The back entrance to the office was unlocked, as if waiting for her. The door opened with a groan that reverberated through the empty space, and Emma hesitated before stepping inside. The building was eerily quiet, its usual bustling energy replaced by an oppressive stillness that felt suffocating. The air inside was cold, too cold for the late spring night, and her breath came out in visible puffs, as if the temperature itself had dropped dramatically. She moved through the corridors, her footsteps silent against the polished floors, but the deeper she went, the more she felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, as if the building itself was aware of her presence. Each hallway she walked down seemed longer, darker, and more labyrinthine than the last. The familiar layout of the office was now a twisted version of itself, the walls closing in around her, the lights flickering above her head, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Her phone buzzed again, startling her from her thoughts. It was another message from Danny, his last words to her before she entered the building. "Be careful. Something's not right." She felt her stomach tighten with unease. Danny had always been the rational one, the voice of reason when things seemed out of control. But his warning now felt more like a prophecy. Emma pressed on, determined to find the truth. She knew there was no turning back. As she passed her own desk, empty, silent, and ghostly, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the voicemail was not just calling for help, but warning her of something far worse. The place she worked in, the building she had known so well, felt alien now, as though it had transformed into a sinister version of itself. Every hallway, every office, every floor seemed to be a reflection of her fear, warping and shifting in ways that defied logic. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing like a living entity. The windows, once offering a clear view of the city skyline, were now covered with thick, shifting shadows that obscured everything beyond. It felt as if the city outside had ceased to exist, as if the office building had become a world unto itself, isolated from everything else. As Emma ascended the stairs to the top floors, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread pressing in on her from all sides. The higher she went, the more distorted the building seemed to become. The elevator doors no longer opened to the floor she had expected, and the stairwell twisted in ways that defied the building's normal layout. Each step was more treacherous than the last, as though the building itself were trying to prevent her from reaching the top. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, the message wasn't from Danny. It was from an unknown number. The text simply read, "She's already inside. Don't come any closer." Her heart raced. Who had sent this message? How did they know where she was? But there was no time to dwell on that. The strange presence she had felt earlier in the building intensified, growing stronger with every passing moment. She was being led somewhere, drawn to a place she didn't understand, but one she felt she had to reach. The further she went, the more the temperature dropped, her breath coming out in ragged clouds of condensation. Her skin prickled with cold, as if the air around her was thick with something malevolent. She reached the top floor, the door standing slightly ajar. The lights flickered inside, casting long shadows across the darkened hallway. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to step inside. Emma hesitated for just a moment, but then pushed the door open. Inside was her office, or rather, a version of it. It looked just as it had when she had last seen it. Her desk, the stacks of paperwork, the faint hum of the air conditioning. But there was something horribly wrong. The air felt dense and heavy, as if it were saturated with a presence she could not name. The room seemed to stretch and contract, as though it was alive. At the far end of the office, she saw something moving in the shadows, something that looked eerily like her. The woman in the shadowy corner didn't move, only watched her with eyes that glinted unnaturally in the dim light. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had to get closer, had to understand what this figure represented. Was it the woman from the voicemail? Or was it something worse, an echo of herself, trapped in some twisted, nightmarish reflection of reality? She moved forward, each step feeling like it took an eternity, the distance between her and the figure stretching and warping. But just before she could reach it, the lights in the office flickered out, plunging her into darkness. The darkness enveloped Emma like a suffocating blanket, swallowing every inch of the office. The lights had flickered once, then a second time, before plunging the room into an oppressive blackness. The only sound was the pounding of her heart, her breath shallow and quick, as she stood frozen in place, trying to adjust her eyes to the void around her. The air felt thick and stagnant, as if time itself had come to a standstill. The cold seeped deeper into her skin, like an icy hand clutching at her insides, numbing her limbs and making it harder to think. Yet the tension in the room grew, an unbearable pressure pressing down on her chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. In the darkness, Emma's mind raced. She had to understand what was happening. Was this the moment? Was this when the truth about the voicemail would finally reveal itself? Her fingers shook as she reached out into the emptiness, her hands grazing the cold, smooth surface of her desk. The world around her felt too large, too empty, like a vast space she had no place in. She was lost, not just in the building, but in time itself. Suddenly she felt it, a presence. It was not just a feeling, but something tangible, something that moved through the air, brushing against her skin, sending chills down her spine. She could sense the presence closing in, watching her, as if it had always been there waiting. It wasn't just a person, though. No, this was something more insidious. Something that had been hiding in the shadows, growing stronger with every passing moment. Emma instinctively moved backward, her foot catching on the edge of something. She stumbled, falling hard against the floor, her body trembling with the realization that something was very, very wrong. She pushed herself up, hands shaking as she tried to find her bearings, but the room around her felt like it was closing in, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. The walls seemed to pulse, like the building itself was alive and aware of her presence. Then, out of the shadows, the figure materialized again. It wasn't just standing there. No, it was moving slowly, deliberately, as though it was not bound by time or space, but instead a creature of the darkness itself. Emma's heart thundered in her chest. It was her, but it wasn't. The figure, or what she perceived as a version of herself, was twisted and distorted. Her features were familiar yet off, the reflection of her face twisted in unnatural ways. The eyes that stared back at her weren't her own, empty, hollow eyes that bore into her soul with a chilling intensity. She couldn't move, paralyzed by the weight of the moment. The figure's presence was overwhelming, an inescapable pull that forced her to confront the very thing she feared the most, herself. The room around Emma began to shift again, the walls warping and bending like they were made of rubber. The space stretched and contracted in a maddening dance, as though the building itself was trying to trap her, to contain her within its endless corridors. Reality itself seemed to bend, disintegrating under the weight of her fear. Was this a dream? A hallucination? Or was this something far worse, something that transcended her understanding of the world? The figure took another step toward her. Emma could feel the temperature drop, the air becoming thick with a suffocating weight. It was closing in on her, inch by agonizing inch. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't respond. Fear had paralyzed her, rooted her to the spot. Then, in a flash, everything went still. The figure stood directly before her now, its presence overwhelming. Emma could feel its cold gaze locking with hers, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something beyond the figure. A glimpse of herself, her reflection from an alternate reality. The truth of her own existence laid bare before her eyes. She wasn't just looking at herself. She was looking at the version of herself that had been consumed, a shadow of her former self, lost to time, to something dark and insidious. She understood then. The voicemail, the strange distortions, the warnings, it was all leading her here. This was the moment when she would cease to exist, when she would become the thing she feared most. A memory, a phantom, a shadow in the darkness. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the air, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Emma's gaze shifted toward the source. It was the door, the very door she had entered through, now slowly creaking open, revealing an unnatural light spilling through the crack. The figure began to move again, but this time, Emma could feel it. Her own self, the distorted version, trying to take her place. The force of it was like an electric jolt, a powerful surge of energy that filled the room. It was as if the very fabric of reality was splitting open, and she could feel herself being pulled apart, torn between the two versions of herself. The pain was unbearable, both physical and mental, as if her very existence was being erased from the world. In a frantic attempt to break free, Emma pushed herself toward the door. The figure reached out to stop her, but it was too late. The moment she crossed the threshold, a strange force hit her, a pulse of energy that felt like it came from every direction at once. Her body convulsed as the light from the open door enveloped her, and for a brief instant, Emma thought she would be consumed by it entirely. But then, the world around her went dark. Emma's body jerked awake, and her eyes snapped open. She was lying on the cold, hard floor of her office, bathed in the same eerie light that had swallowed her moments before. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a war drum in the silence of the room. She gasped for air, disoriented and trembling, as if emerging from the depths of a nightmare. But everything was still. The room was the same as it had been before, familiar, unnervingly so, but something felt profoundly off. The oppressive weight of the atmosphere had lifted slightly, but the stillness remained, heavy and suffocating. Emma's mind raced, trying to piece together the broken fragments of the terror she had just experienced. The twisted figure, the distorted version of herself, had it all been real? Or was it another cruel manifestation of the city's madness, a trick played on her by her own mind? Her fingers grazed the floor, the smooth surface cool beneath her touch, as if anchoring her to reality. She pushed herself up slowly, testing her limbs, making sure they still obeyed her. The hallway outside the office was eerily quiet. No more strange distortions. No more shifting shadows. It almost felt normal again, but that normalcy was laced with a sense of dread that refused to dissipate. As Emma stood and looked around, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The hallway was no longer empty. In the dim light, she saw flickers of movement, shadows stretching unnaturally, bending as if responding to some invisible force. She glanced at her reflection in the glass windows lining the corridor. Her own face stared back at her, but something was wrong. Her eyes looked different. Hollow, empty. For a moment, Emma's breath caught in her throat as she realized the horrifying truth. The version of herself that she had seen in the shadows, trapped, lost, and twisted, wasn't some distant possibility. It was her, a version of her that had already been claimed by whatever force had been lurking in the building, a ghostly echo of a fate that awaited her if she failed to escape. But was she already too late? The uncertainty clawed at her mind as she stepped cautiously down the hallway, the eerie silence amplifying her every movement. Her phone buzzed in her pocket again, startling her. She pulled it out, hands trembling, and saw that it was a new notification. A message from an unknown number, this time with no text, only an image. It was a screenshot of her own office building, the very place where she now stood. But in the photo, the building was covered in shadows. The windows darkened as if the building itself were shrouded in death. And in the center of the image was a figure, her figure, standing in the doorway, staring directly at the camera. She could see the hollow, empty eyes, just as she had seen in the reflection. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was her future. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The world around her seemed to warp again. The walls stretched, the building shifting as though it were alive, twisting and warping around her. The faint sound of whispers echoed in her ears, voices she couldn't understand but felt deep in her bones, as though they were speaking directly to her soul. She stumbled backward, but her feet failed to find solid ground. The floor beneath her seemed to give way, and suddenly she was falling, spiraling into an endless abyss. The walls around her distorted and collapsed, and for a moment she felt weightless, as if she had been cast into a void where time and space no longer mattered. She wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. The darkness enveloped her, suffocating her, consuming her. Just when Emma thought she couldn't endure another second, everything stopped. The spinning, the darkness, it all ceased in an instant. She opened her eyes again, and the world was still. She was standing once more in the hallway, her body trembling from the intense sensation of falling. The figure was gone. The building was still silent. For a moment, Emma thought she might have imagined it all, until she looked down at her hand and saw the faded image on her phone screen. The figure, her future. She had escaped the building, but now the truth loomed over her in ways that words could not describe. Had she truly escaped? Was this some twisted loop, a never-ending cycle where she was forever haunted by the shadow of the woman in the voicemail? Or was she just the latest version of herself to fall victim to whatever dark force had taken hold of the city? The chilling realization washed over her as she stepped out into the street. The city that had once felt alive and bustling now felt hollow, like a shell of its former self. It was empty, abandoned. The air hung thick with an unsettling stillness, and for the first time, Emma felt utterly alone. But then, as if the world had turned against her once again, she felt it. A faint, insistent pull. The feeling that she was being watched followed. Something was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to slip. She wasn't free. Not yet. The streets of New York, once teeming with life, were now unnaturally quiet. The distant hum of traffic that Emma had once taken for granted seemed like a memory, replaced by a suffocating stillness that clung to the air. The flickering streetlights cast long, twisted shadows, making the city seem like a vast, hollow shell of what it had been. Emma's steps echoed in the silence, her heart pounding in her chest with each one, the weight of the unknown pressing in around her. She didn't know how long she had been walking, lost in the maze of empty streets, her mind spinning from everything she had just experienced. The nightmare she had endured, the eerie voicemail, the distorted version of herself, felt like it was still alive in her veins, pulsating and twisting in her thoughts. She had thought she had escaped, but now, more than ever, she was unsure. Had she truly left the building behind, or was she still trapped within it, a puppet on a string, pulled by forces she couldn't understand? With every passing second, the world around her seemed to stretch further from reality. The buildings she passed felt wrong, alien and warped, as though they had been plucked from a different world altogether. Even the air felt thinner, harder to breathe. The shadows, once mere pockets of darkness, had become almost alive, moving in ways they shouldn't have. Emma glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing there, only the long stretch of empty pavement, eerily calm. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, following her. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. She hesitated before pulling it from her pocket, her fingers cold and stiff. She knew somehow that it wouldn't be a message from Danny or Lena this time. It was too late for that, too late for safety. The screen lit up, showing an image, one that stopped her heart cold. It was a photo, just like the one she had received inside the office, but this time, it wasn't an image of the building. It was an image of her, standing alone in the middle of the street, her face pale, eyes wide with terror, as if she were looking straight at the camera. The figure in the photograph was her, but not her. It was the other version, the one she had seen in the darkened office, the hollow-eyed woman who had tried to take her place. Her heart raced, her throat tightening. The message that accompanied the image was simple, chilling. She's already here. Emma's breath caught in her throat as her surroundings seemed to shift once again. The pavement beneath her feet no longer felt solid. It was as if the ground itself was melting away, dissolving into a shifting, endless void. Her legs trembled, and she stumbled, the world around her warping. The buildings were no longer distinct, but massive, indistinct shapes, stretching endlessly into the sky, their edges blurring and melting into the fog that now consumed the city. The pull, the overwhelming sensation of being watched, grew stronger. It was as if she were no longer standing on solid ground, but caught between two realities, two versions of herself fighting for dominance. She stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her. The air grew colder, and she could feel the chill seep into her very bones, freezing her in place. The whispers from the darkness returned, echoing through her mind, disjointed and fragmented. Her vision blurred, the shapes of the city twisting and bending, until all that remained was the oppressive void. In that moment, Emma understood. The terror, the confusion, the strange time distortions, it was all leading to this. The figure she had seen in the office, the one with hollow eyes, was not just a shadow or a twisted version of herself. It was the future. It was the version of herself that would eventually be lost to the darkness, trapped in the maze of the city that was shifting and folding in on itself. This was her fate if she couldn't escape. But there was no escape. Not now. Not anymore. As the ground beneath her began to crumble, Emma felt her body begin to disintegrate, dissolving into the very fabric of the twisted reality she had unknowingly stepped into. The light from the streetlights flickered and dimmed, swallowed by the darkness, until she was completely alone. The whispers grew louder, closer, filling her mind with the same hollow, empty sensation she had felt in the office. And then, in the last moments before she vanished completely, Emma realized the truth. She was not just a victim of the city's strange distortions. She had become a part of them, a shadow in the darkness, trapped in the very maze that had claimed so many before her. The endless loop, the never-ending descent into madness, had already claimed her. There was no way out. Her scream, if it could even be called that, echoed through the empty streets, but there was no one left to hear it. Time was a strange thing in the depths of the city's madness. Emma's awareness began to fragment like broken glass, each shard of thought cutting through her consciousness in jagged, erratic pieces. The eerie, suffocating stillness stretched endlessly, yet there was a peculiar sensation of being in two places at once, as though she were caught between a world that wasn't quite hers and one that could never be hers. The darkness that surrounded her began to pulse, the shadows moving like living things. Emma felt herself slipping, her grip on reality growing thinner by the second. She no longer felt her feet on the ground, no longer heard the cold wind whipping through the city. She was floating, no falling, her body twisting through the folds of the strange space that enveloped her. The ground was no longer solid beneath her. The buildings, the streets, the familiar skyline of New York, everything was disintegrating into an endless void. The city was no more than a memory, fading into something worse. The twist in her mind was sudden, disorienting. Emma realized she wasn't just lost in the city, she had become part of it. The city had never been just a backdrop, a place. No, the city had always been alive, a shifting entity that manipulated time and reality, trapping people within its grasp. And Emma, the woman whose name had once echoed through the office halls, had long been a part of the city's twisted, relentless pulse. The city had claimed her, like it had claimed the others before her, the ones who had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the maze that twisted through the subway tunnels, the shadows of the office buildings, and the streets themselves. Emma tried to resist, but the force was too strong. Her sense of self was slipping, the weight of it all crushing her from every side. She was no longer just Emma Carter, a corporate worker who had stumbled into a nightmare. No, she was something else. She had become one of the countless lost souls the city consumed, trapped in a never-ending loop of shifting realities, endlessly remade and forgotten. She was a shadow, a fragment of a person that no longer belonged to the world she once knew. It wasn't just that she had fallen into the city's grasp. Emma was beginning to realize that the very voice that had haunted her, the voice on the voicemail, the one begging for help, had always been hers. That version of herself, the crying woman in the recording, wasn't from some distant future. She had been there all along, a part of the city's twisted reflection, a ghost that had been waiting for the right moment to be born. And that moment had arrived. The truth was that Emma had been trapped from the very beginning, caught in the web of the city's strange, distorted rules. The other version of her, the one that had called out for help, had already become part of the city's twisted future. The woman begging for help on the voicemail was Emma herself, stuck in a loop that stretched endlessly backward and forward in time, as the city bent and folded reality. Each version of herself, the one on the voicemail and the one in the office, were simply echoes, trapped in a never-ending cycle of the city's madness. The truth hit Emma with full force. The city hadn't tried to claim her. It had already claimed her long ago. As the realization settled in, the edges of her vision blurred, and she felt herself slipping further into the abyss. The familiar city sounds that had once been a comfort were now hollow and distant, drowned out by the ever-present whispers in her mind. She was no longer just a witness to her own disappearance. She had become part of the city's endless web, one of the many souls lost to the labyrinth that had never truly existed, or perhaps always existed, beneath the city streets. Emma's mind began to fracture, the reality around her blurring into indistinct shapes and sounds. The city seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, a never-ending cycle of distortions, as if she were drowning in a flood of her own memories. She had become just another echo, another fleeting shadow in the city's insatiable hunger for souls. And just as she had tried to escape, she had found herself entangled in the web she had never fully understood. The streets, once full of promise and life, were now a hollow echo of what had been, and Emma was no longer its victim. She was its creation. In her final moments, Emma understood that her fear had always been the city itself, that the terror she had felt, the panic that had driven her, had been the key to her own downfall. The moment she thought she had escaped, she had unknowingly stepped deeper into the city's endless maze, forever a part of the puzzle she could never solve. And as her vision faded to black, she was no longer just Emma. She was now one with the city, an echo of the past, a shadow lost in the endless depths of its labyrinth. Emma's presence lingered in the city long after her body had faded into nothing. The world around her was still, unnaturally so, as if the very fabric of reality had been sewn with threads of dark, twisted memories. The streets that had once felt like home, alive with the pulse of a city that never slept, now felt like a dream, a fragile illusion held together by some unseen force. Though Emma was gone, her echo remained. The whispers that once only haunted her mind now drifted through the empty streets like an unspoken warning. People who passed by her old office building in the dead of night spoke of a strange feeling, a sensation that something was watching them from the windows, something uninviting, something cold. The building, once bustling with the activity of corporate life, had become an empty shell, its floors eerily quiet, as though it had swallowed the souls of all who had worked there. The city, with its crooked streets and twisting alleys, carried on in its perpetual dance between time and space, unaffected by Emma's disappearance. It was a city of lost souls, a place where the line between the past, present, and future had long since blurred. It was a place where time folded on itself, where people vanished and reappeared, caught in loops of endless, inevitable fate. The shadows that crept along the pavement were not mere darkness, but the lingering traces of those who had once walked these streets and never left. And somewhere in the endless maze of the city, Emma's reflection could still be seen, faintly, flickering in the glass of the office building, or in the dark corners of the subway tunnels, where the echoes of footsteps never seemed to stop. A woman trapped between two versions of herself, forever lost, her cries fading into the city's undying hum. The lesson that Emma had learned in her final moments reverberated through the endless streets. There are places in this world where the rules of reality break, where the past and future collide in a distorted mirror. Places where time is an illusion, and you never truly escape. The city was one such place, and once you entered its grasp, you were never really free. So, as the wind howled through the empty streets of New York, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay, the people who still lived in the city went about their lives, unaware of the darkness that stalked their steps. But for those few who dared to look too closely, those who wandered just a bit too far into the maze, they might catch a glimpse of a figure in the distance. A figure standing motionless, staring back with hollow eyes, lost in a reality they could no longer escape. Perhaps they would be too afraid to approach. Perhaps they would turn their backs and walk away, as Emma had once done, thinking the city's whispers were nothing more than a trick of the mind. But as the night stretched on, one thing was certain: the city would wait. And one day, when the time was right, another soul would hear the call. Another would step into the shifting maze of New York's shadows, and another would disappear, forever becoming part of the endless story that unfolded in the darkness.